and welcome to Thriver TV, the place to break free from narcissistic abuse with quantum tools and understandings. One of the hardest things to do in our life is forgive the unforgivable. How can we achieve it? Why do we even need to achieve it? The reason I'm sharing this video with you today is because I too have known the torturous state of not being able to get over the past. The pain of the past can be so crippling. And even though we may have left a situation or a person behind and moved on physically, we can still be stuck in the emotional damage. And it feels so painfully real. It's as if the events and the violations are still continuing. I promise you there is only one way out: forgiveness. So right from the beginning, I want to introduce the concept that forgiveness and letting go are one and the same thing. And this is exactly what our in-depth dive is about today. It's about letting go in order to set ourselves free. And I promise you, I will address all the reasons you may be in opposition to this. And rather than turning this video off, I want to make a deal with you. At the end of this, you don't have to forgive if you don't want to, because it's your choice. And during this episode, you may feel challenged, angry, and triggered, but maybe by the end, you're going to feel relieved. So all I ask of you is that you watch this in its entirety. Okay, so do we have a deal? If we have a deal, let's get started. Okay, so ironically, the things that hurt us the most, the things that are causing us the most inner being trauma, the terrible feelings of violation and injustice and inhumanity regarding what happened to us, they're the things that we need to let go of the most in order to feel relief and freedom. But maybe we feel like we can't until justice is done, until there is some level of accountability or apology, or until karma has had its way with this person. When we feel like this, emotionally we're in the holding pattern of trauma and our life is stuck where it is because we can't restart it whilst we're in this stagnant pattern. We may not have realized it, that this is handing our power away, because quantum law is so within, so without. It means that we're not being the generative source of our own reality of wanting to create freedom and relief. We've slipped into the conditional living of needing things outside of us to change in order to change us, rather than changing ourselves on the inside in order for the outer to change. It's wrong town. In this place, we don't receive validation, we don't get closure, we don't get the relief and the release. And of course we feel like it's all happening to us because of the stuff that we can't get over. Yet what is really happening is we're not letting it go. So how do we change this? How do we release the trauma and take our power back? By forgiveness. And it's my heartfelt desire in this video to raise you out of your victimhood into your freedom and empowerment, with forgiveness as the key. It's a journey I fully endorse because I took it. I moved past the unforgivable to a totally different level of being, I promise you. When I couldn't let go of the pain, I couldn't ever imagine feeling happy, sane, loving, and creative again. Whereas now I know how profoundly better I am, how much more smoothly my life goes, and the joy and love I experience as a result of letting go and moving on. Here is the illusion that our ego creates, that letting it go, forgiving, is somehow dismissing what took place. Our ego would have us believe that it lets that person get away with it, and it's saying, what happened to me wasn't wrong. As far as our ego is concerned, it doesn't feel right to let go and forgive. Yet the feeling of hanging on to being right about the injustice and how wrong that person was and what they did to us doesn't feel right either. In fact, it is eating us alive every day. I love the expression holding on to what somebody did to you is like taking poison every day and hoping the other person will drop dead. I remember how toxic that felt to me and how much energy I burned every day hanging on to that stuff. So much so I could barely engage in anything else. And no matter how many times I vented and tried to talk it out to other people, the pain never left. Because I was never letting it leave. I literally had no idea who I was without being a victim to what had happened. Maybe you're going through this same thing. And my heart goes out to you. It's such a painful loop of trauma to be stuck in. And the crazy thing is we all want the same thing. We want the pain to end and a wonderful life to start. We all said, I want to be free of this torment. I never want to think about this ever again. That's the ultimate goal for all of us. But we can't get there until we forgive. Now, I may be rattling some of you. You may be bristling in resistance, and I understand totally. It's normal. It's human. Yet I'm really not a fan of being human. I much prefer being quantum because I found a more limited human experience rather painful to live. Because when we're being human, we're saying things like, why should I forgive? Why the hell should I forgive somebody else's atrocious, terrible behaviour to myself and the people I love? I want to help you out with a quantum truth here that may be one of the most powerful reasons to forgive initially for you. When we hang on to what somebody else did to us, we've absorbed all the toxic energy of the event and the behaviour. And therefore, so within, so without, the toxic repercussions of that are coming at us, not them. It's kind of like a hot potato. They took it out from them and they handed it to us and we embodied it. All of that toxic, horrible energy. Hurt people. They offload and hurt somebody else and stick it inside them. And truly, this is why so many people say there is no justice for victims. And it's true. When victims are still carrying the toxic trauma of victimization inside them, they're the ones bearing the brunt of the energy of abuse, and life keeps dishing up to them more of it. And this is why people say, why do bad people get away with it and their victims cop all the pain and the punishment? Now you understand why that's going on. Now I want you to really understand what happens when you shift. If you let go and cleanse and free yourself from the trauma of what somebody did to you, that hot potato goes home. The toxic energy leaves your inner being, and first of all, it goes back to recycling, it goes back to source, whereby the energy is now engaged for the highest good of all concerned in regard to the situation that created it, which means everyone's opportunity for personal evolution. And whoever who is connected, who hasn't evolved into a higher level for themselves and others, is now going to get that negative energy to bring to them the opportunity, which means being on their knees usually, just as it happened to you, to heal something that they've not previously healed. I can't tell you how many times I've seen abusers struck down with repercussions when their victims forgive and internally go free. And the total irony is, once we realise how karmic energy really works, We may work really hard initially to forgive and let go so that all the bad stuff goes home to sender. However, by the time we reach forgiveness and that internal freedom, we actually have no need for that to happen to set us free. We already are free. And that's exactly when it does. It's another quantum law that when you need anything conditionally in order to be whole, you will never get that thing. You will only get more feelings of emptiness and conditional neediness. Are you starting to get it? Let's just go through some degrees of forgiveness and what they are and how to really do it in order to let go. And I talk about the 5 levels of forgiveness in a previous article of mine, which I provided the link to with this video. So let's start with number 1, logical forgiveness. The first one is a logical attempt to let go. When people say, I'm over that, or I've dealt with that, and you know they're not and they haven't. This is not embodied forgiveness. It's about burying what happened and attempting to block it out and just get on with it. Doesn't work. The trauma still has a life of its own within them. Depression and anxiety is going to continue to come up, and people that represent that trauma are likely to represent in this person's life. Okay, so number 2 is evolving forgiveness. This is about the giving up of judgment and righteousness. When we give up judgment and righteousness, it's much easier to give up our resistance to forgiving. When we look inwards instead of outwards and align ourselves with the quantum truth of so within, so without, we can ask ourselves, what is this person's treatment of me showing me about my own treatment of me? Where have I self-abandoned, invalidated myself, self-criticized, applied conditional love and shamed myself? And then we start to awaken out of the trance of people have done this to me into the quantum truth of course I accepted and stayed with people who treated me like this. They were granting me the opportunity to realize the healing and the love that I needed to grant myself. Number 3 is releasing our trauma in order to forgive. Because it's very hard to just accept self-responsibility and drop judgment and righteousness when we have a ton of trauma still stuck inside us. We may logically want to give up these things, but it's like we have a beast inside that doesn't want to give it up. And this is what happens when you're trying to learn it rather than being it. To be something when you're not already can require directly changing your inner being, your subconscious programming, and then you will be it. When you release the trauma out of your inner being, then you have the space inside to be different. And what you are releasing is the unhealed parts of you that were from epigenetic and childhood wounds, unconsciously holding other people responsible for your own levels of love, approval, survival, and security. And of course, these underdeveloped, unhealed parts were incensed when this person damaged you instead of granting you these commodities. When you heal this stuff, the relief begins, and you discover that your wholeness as an adult is between you and you, regardless of what somebody else is or isn't doing. Now on to number 4, radical forgiveness. This arises organically on its own accord when we release our trauma. Rather than seeing life and people happening to us, we understand that they were happening for us. And a wonderful thing happened today. I love how life lines up. I was in a hairdressing salon this morning, as you can see, And I was sitting next to a lovely lady, and we just happened to get into a discussion about a severe persecution that she'd just gone through with a narcissistic boss. And of course, she was stuck in the trauma and the pain of what had happened to her. But as I was listening, I understood a much deeper truth to it. This one, that she had already been carrying the epigenetic or childhood trauma unconsciously of persecution within her inner being, which would have been playing out in varying degrees in her life everywhere, but it's her normal. I went through the same thing, so many of us have. And life and her soul had purposefully and ingeniously lined her up with this abusive female boss in her experience to re-traumatise, to bring to her attention the inner trauma of persecution so that finally she could come home, locate it in her body, load it up and release it out and go free. So that finally, after all this time, which may have been lifetimes, she could come into her authentic true self. Because if she evolves herself beyond this, not only will the trauma of what happened dissolve, so will the attacks and the entire experience, because it doesn't need to be there any longer once the evolution message is delivered and taken. And then not only will she be relieved of these events, she will go forth into life being even more powerful and free and extended than she ever was before this happened. And she'll be totally grateful for this woman having shown up in her experience to help her get there. That's the deal. How can we be resentful of people who are our most integral, necessary aids, angels in disguise, posing as abusers, so that we can get our evolutionary self-work done? And of course, there is no way that we're going to be inviting these people around for wine and cheese. Of course, we pull away and we stay away, and we never tell them that we're grateful, because that's only lining ourselves up for more abuse. But we are so grateful that they crossed our path. And I promise you, no one ever has power over you when you're grateful that they came into your experience. So number 4 is all about the realization that there's actually nothing to forgive. Okay, so now we're on to number 5. The next level of forgiveness is compassionate forgiveness. It's when we realize that we're all in this together, that the entire issue has been trauma. Trauma of the human condition, the brutality that has happened on this planet, and what has been handed down through the generations, as well as the conditioning we have received to try to find wholeness of self outside of self instead of on the inside, which has been a disastrous recipe for separation from ourselves, others, and life force. This is what's created abuse and trauma, because oneness, which is the true quantum truth, means I'm you and you are me. How could we harm a part of ourselves? Abusers are in separation consciousness, and victims are in it too. So are we going to perpetuate this toxicity and pass it on to our future generations and keep it going by hanging on to the trauma? Or are we going to do the responsible quantum thing, which is forgive, let it go, release our traumas, see the bigger picture, want wholeness for all as well as ourselves, because it is all one. And I promise you, when you release your inner traumas, you are releasing the trauma of the human collective. And then we're not only going to heal ourselves, but be a force, one person at a time, to heal humanity, literally. And I know what I chose all those years ago. I chose to stop my personal world being toxic. I chose to let go. I chose to forgive. And I've never looked back, and I know you can too. And that is exactly what this Thriver community is all about, being the change we want to live and see for those we love by setting ourselves free. So I hope this has helped, and I'd love you to come over to the blog and have a conversation with me about it there at blog.melanietoniaevans.com. And I hope this has shifted something in you if you know it needed to shift. So until the next episode, which will have the lovely Tiggy back, and hopefully he'll come on and do Tiggy TV like he normally does, because he's coming home. It's been a while and it's time for him to come home, which is awesome. So until then, keep smiling, keep healing, and keep thriving, because there's nothing else to do. Lots of love. Bye-bye.